I'm Lo. Welcome back to my channel, and today's video is another America versus the Netherlands video. I really like filming these, so I thought it would be interesting to do some research and to share some things that I've encountered in my life living in both places. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. So today we're going to talk about America versus the Netherlands in terms of culture. So I have a couple of things that I want to talk about. So let's jump right into it with the first thing, which is directness. So this is something that I definitely had to get used to when I moved to the Netherlands when I started college here. People in Holland are really direct, and especially if you're coming from America, it can seem pretty rude. I'll give you an example of some things that I've encountered and what both sides kind of think. So I remember one of my first months of living here, I was at a lecture. I was hungover because I went out, and this girl that I had just barely met a couple times, she comes over to me and she's like, "Holy shit," in Dutch, "you look like shit today, are you hungover?" And I was like, "Excuse me, that's so rude, how can you tell me that I look like shit?" Well, I didn't actually say that, I was just shocked. But in Dutch, that's just really regular, they'll call you out, they'll be super direct about stuff, or they'll tell you "Oh, you really don't look that good today," and stuff like that. Whereas in America, I feel like people might be a little bit more fake, and they'd be like, "Oh my god, sweetie, are you okay? Can I get you some water? Are you hungover?" You know, stuff like that. So yeah, that was a big difference that I had to get used to. And I think both sides view this kind of differently. Dutch people can be more blunt and direct, and American people are more civil and less willing to engage in conflict. Sometimes that can be a little bit fake though, because I remember when I was in middle school in America, we would get party invitations and it would say something like, "Don't talk about this party at school because Sammy wasn't invited," which I remember when I told my parents stuff like that, they were like, "Huh? Can't you just talk about it?" And a kid needs to learn that they're not going to be invited to every party. It shouldn't be this big secret. You can just be open and direct about it. Whereas in America, that was not done. So I feel that's a huge difference in directness. So definitely if you're an American coming to the Netherlands, you're gonna have to get used to the directness of the Dutch people. And if you're going to America and you're Dutch, you probably are gonna be "Oh, people are fake," but they're just more likely to be civil and not really call you out on anything. So if you call them out, they're gonna get a little bit offended. Again, these are all my experiences. I'm not trying to make huge generalizations. I know every place is pretty different, but this is kind of what I've noticed. Okay, let's jump right into the second category, which is be normal or do normal. So this is something that is often said in Holland, do normal, which just means be normal. The Netherlands is kind of this culture of moderation and modesty and just being normal. So if I was actually kind of when I tell friends this, "Oh, in high school I was part of this club, I was president of this club, I did Model UN, I did debates, I played a sport," they're like, "What the hell? Do normal. You just go to school, why would you do all this extra stuff?" So that is a huge difference. And also if you say you saved up to really buy something expensive, you're working, you're saving up, if I would post that on social media in the Netherlands, people would be do normal, why are you showing off? Versus I feel in America, it's really this culture, it's probably rooted in this whole American dream thing, if you work hard you can get far. So people really work really hard and showing that off, and it's often really talked about really well, whoa, look at this person, they have a job and they're playing a sport and they're in school and they're doing all these clubs, it's a very positive thing, and no one would be "Oh, be normal." No, because you're trying to achieve your goals, which is something that's really sought after. So that was something I kind of had to get used to when I was "Oh, I thought it was really cool that I did all this stuff in high school and I was chasing my dreams." People would be just why? It's very moderate here. People are more focused on a work-life balance instead of always achieving the best. And I feel you can even see this in enthusiasm. If you ask a Dutch person "Oh, how are things?" they'll be "Oh, it's good, it's fine," It's very moderate, versus if you ask an American "Hey, how are you?" people will be "I'm awesome, I'm great." So the enthusiasm is also really different, I think, because of this whole culture of moderation. So I thought that was really interesting, something I definitely had to get used to. And now sometimes I'll even notice when I'm in the States, I'll be "Okay, don't, you don't have to show off like that." So I guess you get influenced by where you live. The next category I want to talk about is progressiveness. So I definitely don't want to say that there are no problems in the Netherlands. There definitely are, and there's a lot that we still need to work on. But I feel in terms of progressiveness, we are further than the US here in the Netherlands. There's a lot more acceptance of people on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. There's a lot more acceptance of people of different races, but it's definitely like still a problem. And especially now in the US, like with the whole movement going on, I really hope that there are going to be major changes there as well. But as a whole nation, I feel like Netherlands is progressiver than the United States. It's definitely something that like I noticed, even just going to a private school on the east coast of the US, we probably had like 3 or 4 people of color in our grade, which definitely like wasn't okay, versus now going to a university here in Amsterdam, being around people of all backgrounds and people of color is a lot more common than it was in the United States. And even in like political culture, you can kind of see this, because something like socialism, I remember when we learned about socialism in the US, people were like, oh my god, like socialism is the gateway to communism, like people, it's definitely frowned upon. It's, I think, one of the reasons Bernie Sanders hasn't made it far in both the elections he tried to run in, versus like in Europe or in the Netherlands, socialism is, we're not totally socialistic, but it's definitely like seen as a good thing to make sure that like capital greed and corporate greed doesn't like take over our society, versus capitalism is obviously a really big part of US society. So that's again something that I've kind of noticed, especially talking about politics with friends. Again, I'm no expert on these things, but just some things to keep in mind. So the next category is humor. Humor is probably the biggest thing that I've had to get used to, but I still don't really understand most of the time, because Dutch humor is like a very sarcastic, it's very ironic, and I'm like very gullible. So if someone will tell me like, I'm like, oh, like what are your plans this weekend? They're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like fly to Mexico, and I'll be like, oh okay, cool, versus they're just saying that because they have to work like an 8-hour shift, and I'm like, oh, you're going to Mexico, that's so cool. And they're like, how are you so stupid, how are you so gullible? But that's like very Dutch humor, is like being kind of ironic and being satirical, which is definitely hard if it's like not your type of humor. And Dutch humor is very much like roasting each other. Like my friends kind of know not to roast me too hard, because the first couple times I would hang out with friends here and people would start roasting each other, like I would like almost want to cry. Like if someone roasts me, like that's not the way I feel like most of my friendships in the US worked. Like our humor wasn't based on like roasting each other, and it'll really like strike a chord. And I've noticed that with other internationals here as well. Like if you are really start roasting them, they're like, what the fuck, that's so mean. Like people don't see it as humor. Versus Dutch people, like if you're friends with someone, you can kind of roast them like crazy. Then I was kind of thinking like, what is American humor? I feel like a lot of it is more like, also even if you see on like TV or in skits, it's a lot more like slapstick or physical comedy, where the joke's kind of like played out instead of like more satirical, ironical humor. So I feel like that's a big thing. And I feel like it's less like, it's roasting like public figures, and like political jokes can be made, but not necessarily like roasting people individually. So it was definitely a huge shift as well that I had to get used to. I feel like now I'm a mix of both. Also, I feel like I'm not really that funny, so for me it doesn't really matter. But I've definitely like learned to accept Dutch humor and Dutch jokes. So the next thing I want to talk about is politeness versus superficiality. So this is a thing I hear from my Dutch friends who have visited the US a lot. They're always like, ugh, it's so annoying when you walk into a store and someone is like, hey, how are you doing today? Like, can I help you? How are you? They're like, that's so superficial. They don't care how I am. Versus like, I always really liked it in the US, and I really miss it here. Like if I go into a store, if I'm in a restaurant, they're not like overly nice to you. They're not really like asking you how you are. And so this is, I think, a big like point of contention between both cultures, because Americans think it's just polite to be like, hey, how are you? Obviously, they're not really like waiting for you to tell your whole life story. Versus Dutch people are like, don't ask me how I am if you don't want to know. Like, it's just superficial. So it's like definitely a big thing and a big difference. So if you walk into a store in the Netherlands, don't expect them to be like, hi, how are you? Like, can I help you? Like, if you need help, you can go up to them, but they're not really gonna be like asking you how you are and stuff like that. Yeah, and this was kind of again with the whole same thing I was talking about like the words before. Like in America, it's a lot more like, I'm amazing, I'm doing great, like how are you? Versus like in the Netherlands, it's like, oh, I'm good, fine, yeah. You know, like again, that moderation, it's very different between the US and the Netherlands. So yeah, don't expect someone to be super overly friendly to you in a restaurant or a store in the Netherlands. And I guess the other way around, expect someone to ask you how you're doing in the US. And so the last thing that I wanted to talk about today is competition. So this is also something I've definitely noticed. I remember when I was in elementary school in the US, it was my first year living in the US in 5th grade, and we had to run the mile. So in gym class, like you had to run a mile, and it was like this presidential fitness test, and parents came to watch. We did it at our local high school track. And I like wasn't that fast, and I remember this girl, she was super fast and she lapped me, and her mom was running with her, and as soon as this girl passed me, this mom was like screaming like, yeah, Brooke, another trophy for our trophy corner. Literally everyone got a participation medal, I think. And I was like, what the hell? And I remember like being really upset because obviously she lapped me. And my parents were like, yeah, people are like way more competitively driven. Like when I was in elementary school, I had some trouble with math, and I remember that like I was placed in the regular math level, and this mom, I was in 5th grade, which means I'm 10 to 11 years old. This mom goes up to my mom and is like, oh, well, if Lois is already placed in like middle level math in middle school, then she'll never get into Harvard. My mom was like, this kid is 10, like what are you talking about? So I feel like in the US things are way more competition driven, and I feel like everything's more competition, and it's not about like winning or losing, it's just about winning. Even like in little things, like you have student council elections, you have prom queen, stuff like that, which is just not a thing in the Netherlands. Like there's not that much competition, and I think Dutch people can be very competitive, but it's not that much about winning. Like there, of course, like if you're playing a football game or you're playing a whatever hockey game or whatever, people still like obviously really want to win, but at the end of the day, like even if you lose, it's fine. You grab a beer with your teammates and it's still a good day. And I remember that even when I was babysitting a little boy here, and I was at his soccer game, and he was like, yeah, like he lost, and I was like, oh, are you upset? And he's like, no, like we played, we had fun, and now I get like a juice box, so I'm fine. Versus like I remember my ex-boyfriend in the US, he was a lacrosse player, and if he lost a game, like he would be in a bad mood all day. So I feel like there's definitely a difference in competition here and there. You can say what you want about that. I think American people, they get kind of the stereotype of being lazy, but at least in my experience at my high school, people were super competitive and like achieved really high things, versus here people are kind of like, yeah, look at an average grade, it's fine. That's probably also has something to do about like US colleges look at grades versus Dutch colleges don't when you try to get in. So definitely something different, but something I had to get used to. I remember like here at uni, you know, like in high school it would be like, oh, what did you get? And it would kind of be like, oh, well, I got like higher. Versus here in uni, when someone asked me like, hey, like what'd you get on a test? It wasn't like a competition, it was just like curious, like how'd you do? I want to see like what the average grade was, which is definitely interesting that like there's such a big difference in competitiveness. But yeah, these were just a couple of like my first thoughts when I moved here about the differences in culture. I hope you guys found this interesting. I like this series. I'm not going to do it every week, but once in a while I like putting one of these up there. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. And I post videos every Tuesdays and Fridays, so be sure to check in Friday with a new video.